Welcome everyone to this second discussion forum that we are organizing in the Reincarnate EU-funded project. In today's session, we are going to talk about creating public value through circular waste reduction in construction. And this series of webinars, the purpose is to engage with the stakeholders in the sector, to hear about your feedback on different solutions that are currently happening in the industry, and also to let you know what are we doing at Reincarnate, what innovations we are developing, and how we are actually contributing to a greener construction sector. In today's session, we have some invited speakers here. We will start with Pablo van den Bosch, he's director at Madaster. Then I will introduce you to Brian van Laar. It's a colleague working at Reincarnate as well, and he's working at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment in the Technical University of Delft. And then the last speaker will be Joao Gonçalves, working at Erasmus University of Rotterdam. And actually, these discussion forums, what we want is to really engage with you, to hear about your feedback, your experiences, etc. So at the end, we will run like a Q&A session where we really want you to interact with us, to ask any question you have to the speakers, and to create this dynamic discussion. Okay. So yeah, I think we can start already with you, Pablo. Pablo, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you. Let me first introduce who I am and what I do. And then after that, I'll explain something about what we try to realize from a social value point of view and what it actually means, how tough it is or how easy it is. So I'm Pablo van den Bosch. I'm one of the co-founders of Madaster. I have a background as a consultant. So I used to give consultancy advice to banks in the international finance business. So trading risk, trading money. I did that with a group of colleagues, and about 10 years ago I sold my company, continued for a few more years in the financial services industry, and then met an architect called Thomas Rau, and he inspired me to think about something more than just doing financial transactions, but think about the value that we have as a society, where one of the biggest assets is the fact that we can enjoy what planet Earth is giving us, resources and energy. And the way how we have realized and created an economy, we take resources for granted. So we take, make, and waste these resources, and that's a bit of a strange thing. Why are we doing that? Because that cannot last forever, and in the end, our society will have the negative results of that. So he asked me, and we had discussions with some more people, how can we adjust this economic principle of take, make, and waste? How can we adjust it and get to an economy where we take, make, and reuse over and over again? Because that is true sustainability. And as he is an architect working in the construction and design world, and also looking at that particular sector, a lot of waste is being generated, a lot of energy is being consumed in that industry. So why don't we start over there? And with a rather simple concept of waste is material without an identity, we came up with the concept of let's give an identity to materials. So write down what we are using in our built environment so that we can keep those valuable resources available forever. So that we build something, and when we take a product or a material out, we can reuse it. So think about how is it connected into a building? Is the stuff that we use, is it healthy? So is it healthy enough to reuse it? If we reuse a product or material, can we trade it? So can we get the value out of it as an owner instead of throwing it away, but can we sell it via marketplace whatsoever? And that's how we came up with the concept of Madaster. I don't know if you're familiar with something called Kadaster. That is, we see that in many countries. A Kadaster is a registration of land ownership or real estate ownership. And we changed the name slightly to Madaster with the M for materials, so a materials cadastre. So writing down, registering what you apply in the built environment, and that can be because you're creating something new, but you can also write down what you already have created a while ago. And with the technology that we have nowadays, and we can look into BIM, building information models, 3D modeling that architects are using, or we can use techniques to scan existing buildings or to come up with even prediction models. How much concrete do you expect in a building that is built for family houses in 1950? How much concrete, how much steel, how much glass is there? That's the stuff that we do. And the result of our platform, because it's a data platform where you can register real estate and infrastructure objects, the result or the products that come out of that is a set of data that you can use to report, create what we call a material passport for a building. You can report on a particular environment, so the city of Delft. You can report on an investment portfolio, the supermarket real estate investment fund number 3 of Bank ING. What is the embodied carbon impact of that investment fund, for instance? That's the stuff that we do. The key question is, does it help? And does it add value? And that depends a lot on who you talk to. We are convinced that we deliver value because we now know what the impact is of our buildings. So we can make better choices to make better buildings, new ones, or improve existing buildings. We provide insight in, for instance, an investment portfolio. Is your money invested in a good building or in a bad building? If you register a building that is going to be maintained in 10 years' time or 5 years' time or adjusted in 3 years' time, think about a hospital or a logistical building, it helps a lot if you have detailed information about this building so you can better adjust it instead of just tearing it down and throwing all the stuff away. So we think we generate value. But if you are an architect and you have to add extra work into the registration and you're not being paid for it and nobody is demanding that you do this, why should you do it? Because it's good for the planet? Well, maybe you want to do something else which is good for the planet. So this is where we are working upon on a daily basis, try to help our clients to realize economies of scale, efficiencies because of economies of scale, or tapping into their operating procedures so it's rather easy to create those passports. But the value for our society is not being felt by the individual user of our product. That's why we need to have some regulations. That's why we need to have industry leaders that say, I want to invest in proper buildings and I demand the insight and the proof of that. So creating social value is something that everybody wants, but nobody is willing to invest in today. I don't know. I think I'm close to my 10 minutes of introduction. With a triggering statement at the end and some indication of what we do. And I'm clueless if you are familiar with what we are doing. I see Brian van Laar, he probably knows what we do, being an architect, but I'm not sure if the rest of you know it as well. This for my introduction, and looking forward to questions and Q&A whenever it's time to do so. Was this a bit what you expected, Carmen?
Yeah, absolutely, Pablo. Thank you so much.
I'm glad.
Yeah, it was a perfect introduction. Also to let you know what you're doing. This is very, very linked actually with what we do at Reincarnate. I mean, this platform that you're creating to track all the materials, etc. I mean, in Reincarnate, we are doing kind of the same. We are developing different technical innovations with the purpose to give new opportunities to buildings, construction products, and materials. So yeah, it was super interesting to know what you do at Madaster, and yeah, absolutely. Like if anyone in the session has any questions, please write them in the chat or just wait until the end to ask Pablo directly. So we are gonna move to Brian now. Presentation. Brian,
Yeah.
thank you for joining.
Let me share my screen real quick. Can you guys see my screen before I?
Yes, we
before I
see
start?
it, but it's not in presentation mode. Yeah, now it is. Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Carmen, for giving me the opportunity to present something. Yeah, within the Reincarnate project, what we're doing, but also within my own PhD. So yeah, first a little bit about me. So my name is Brian van Laar. I'm a PhD student at the Technical University of Delft. And I'm also in the Reincarnate project with a lot of people here today. And what my research is about creating a decision-making model, how I called it, for the circular adaptive reuse of buildings. So what we want to do is sort of help decision makers in adaptive reuse projects in guiding their decision and help them develop scenarios and then pick the right scenarios for their project. I started around in September 2022, I think. So we're over halfway in the project, and now the fun part sort of begins, where we sort of test out the innovations that we developed in the project. Yeah, to tell you a little bit more about Reincarnate in general. So I put the mission of the project down, and Reincarnate sort of aims to revolutionize the construction industry by developing the technical and social means to establish a reincarnation practice within the building sector. But what does that mean? Basically, what we do, we on 3 different levels. So the building itself, the building product, and also the building materials. We're looking into reusing or extending the life of those buildings and building products. But when I look at the construction industry, and before I joined the Reincarnate project, what I thought about when I looked at a mission like this, but also about the project, was that the construction industry is not necessarily about values. It's more about taking action, having a plan, sort of doing what is asked of you, putting down the building, and that's it. And when I start, preparing for this presentation, thinking about value, I had something different in mind, something more about politics, seeing something, someone like Bernie that has real sort of personal values, personal beliefs, and thinking about value, I thought about people in politics that want to convey their message, and people that have sort of similar values are then willing to vote for them. So thinking about value, this is where I sort of started off. But during my time in Reincarnate, but also the time as a PhD student, I started thinking about value in a little different way. So what we see a lot of times is that value is associated with money. So something is valuable or not. And a lot of things, for example, shareholder value is really important in a lot of cases. But what I started to realize, and we have a new sort of research group within our chair in our department that looks at new ways of defining value within the built environment. So I have an example of my street in Delft. You see no cars, for example. You see a lot of green. How do we value stuff like this? The social impact, for example. Do we value that in terms of money, or are there different ways of valuing this? And I started to think about value, and this is what you do if you have a presentation about values: is that you ask ChatGPT to come up with a definition of values. And in this case, I started with the personal values. And what it gave me was that personal values are deeply held beliefs and principles that sort of guide an individual's decisions, actions, and interactions. So an important aspect is that you feel something deeply, or you have beliefs and principles that you are convinced about, and then you act basically, or you decide based on these personal values. What are some of these personal values? For myself, I think honesty, creativity, something like this, kindness might be important, and those are sort of values that you start with. But from the personal side, you can also have shared values, which are basically, I think, a collective of principles. So the personal values or individual values that you have combined in a group, an organization, that sort of form the foundation of decision making. And this can be in a lot of different levels. So an example, which I always think is really nice, is the Patagonia example. So you're probably all familiar with the company, but they really have the environmental impact of their products as a value in their company, and they not only share it with the people in their company, but also share it with the clients they have all around the world. So a really important foundation for their decision making comes from the value of environmental impact that they think is important. But there are also some, if you look at a broader scale, some other values that are important. For example, in the Netherlands, we were the first country to legalize same-sex marriage, because I believe the values that we have is that equality is important. So equality is an important value that we have, and therefore we act or decide upon those values. But even on a broader scale, you could say, the free trade agreement within the European Union could, serve as a value that we think it's important to share trade and have open borders in the sense that we can trade with each other. But even on a broader scale, values can be something like having nutrition and food as a human right, valuing that everybody has enough food to survive is something that's important and a value you can base your decisions about. So how do we go from the shared values that you see here to more public values in a sense? And these public values sort of refer to collective benefits and principles, but there are a couple of things that are important when looking at public values. So the first thing is that it's about a common good, something that we all share that goes beyond individual interests. So something might be good for you as an individual, but not for the entire common good as a whole. So and another important thing is the long-term aspect of it. So within public values, long-term or the long-term thinking is something that we value and should be sort of added in our decision making. But what we see right now is that the current reality is that although this public value is acknowledged, it's not really structurally embedded in the decision making. And we see that short-term economic benefits still sort of take precedence a lot of the time. And we see a big difference in the ambitions that people or projects have compared to what really comes out of it, the reality. And I'll skip over this because you probably know we have a big problem when it comes to, the built environment. There's a lot of environmental impact there. And what we also see is that the average lifetime of a building is nowhere near where it should be. There's beautiful buildings all around the world that can stand for hundreds of years. But we see that still a lot of buildings are being demolished, before they enter their physical life. So how, if we value the environmental impact so much, how comes that we still demolish, buildings on such a big scale with only the economic value in mind? And that's why I started to think about embedding public value and why it's hard. And there's a couple aspects that I see a lot of times. For example, the complexity of the project. Things are too complex to also think about public value. The stakeholders, there are a lot of different stakeholders, for example, that have conflicting ideas or criteria. That can be an important aspect. The translation, the translation of abstract goals and abstract ideas into real measures, but also the long-term impact that it's hard to think about. So people mostly think about the short-term impact. But what we see, complexity, we can do a lot of fun stuff. We can make buildings that are beautiful, that are really complex. So is complexity really the issue here? The same holds for stakeholders. There's a lot of different values and opinions, but we also manage to have elections where we can sort of combine all the values that we have together into a system that works quite well, I would say. So stakeholders might also not be the problem, as well as the translation. there's abstract things like sustainability, but we still manage to sort of translate the abstraction of sustainability into more concrete, measures or concrete ways of measuring this in, for example, a BREEAM certificate. But also, the long-term impact is not as hard as you might think. There's a lot of projects or a lot of ideas that we think about long-term, and it's not as hard as you might think. So why is it so hard to go from public value to the reality? Why is there such a big difference there? That's why I want to go to the law of lost ambition. You might have heard of it. This law basically says that throughout the project, there's a lot of ambitions being lost if you compare it from the start to the finish of the project. And above the line, there's a loss of ambitions that's well researched, but there's also a lot of loss of ambition that's sort of unnecessary. It's not needed in a way. So throughout the project, what we see a lot of times, there's ambition flowing away from the project that's, let's say, too expensive. It's not in the program of requirements. Every single step you take, we have some ambitions that's lost. And how do we go from vision to reality? How do we minimize sort of the loss of ambition and come up with plans that are really ambitious, that have public value in them, but are also realized? And what I want to sort of find out, or what I want to do is look into the mapping of conflicting values, because I think that's a really important part that's missing a lot of times in today's project. So if we map these conflicting values, there's a lot of benefits to this. For example, the identification of potential conflicts, the minimization of unintended consequences, and in the end, important as well, the safeguarding of the public values that we come up with in the beginning. So that's why I came up with, and I will go through it quickly because it might be a little bit long, but that's why I came up with a scenario development process, or I didn't come up with it, but I used it and applied it, which is called the cross impact balance analysis, which you can use for scenario development. And what this does is, based on 4 steps, come up with a consistent scenario that embeds the values that you have as a shareholder or stakeholder group into the decision making. It starts with descriptors, which are basically important factors or important influences that can influence a project. So in a case of adaptive reuse, this could be the social impact, which is an important aspect that you want to embed. There's also some criteria you can measure this, but the idea is that before a project, you first identify what's important, what are the important descriptors. The second step is important because what you want to do is come up with potential end states or potential future scenarios for every single descriptor, to finally find out where the interrelationships are, where the important connections are, and the conflicting criteria are, to minimize the loss of ambition. So what do variants looks like? There are a couple different options for variants. But basically what this is the options that you have for a project for every descriptor that you come up with. Then the next step, which is the most important part for this case to minimize the loss of ambition, is to really go into what are the relationships between this. Every single variant that you come up with, every single option has a relationship with another option. And if you forget to map these relationships, it's really hard to come up with scenarios that will be plausible and consistent in the end. So what you do, and what we did before, is we started to map the relationships that all of these objectives and all of these variants have on each other, to find out which combinations of variants that you come up with are actually consistent and plausible, and we can actually put together and create scenarios out of this. And if you map these relationships, you can get a consistent view of the future. So a consistent view of what works well together. You can do this through a certain software. I won't go over it too much. But the idea is that you map the relationships that every single variant has on each other to finally come up with consistent scenarios. And these consistent scenarios are plausible and consistent because they can all work together, but are also driven from values up. So it provides a good way of starting from abstract values into scenarios that could work together and could, minimize the loss of ambitions that you saw before. You could visualize these, but the important part is that every single scenario that you come up with is drawn from the values that you have, is consistent in the way that they work together, and will therefore minimize the loss of ambition. So what we want to do is go from a picture like this, where we start losing ambitions throughout the project, to more of a situation like this, where the ambitions that we have at the beginning of the project will remain throughout the project, and maybe even go to something like this, where the ambitions that we have, even in the use phase at the end, are maybe bigger or more elaborate than what we start from. So that's what we want to do: minimize the loss of ambitions by mapping the conflicting criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for this very insightful presentation, I have to say. Very interesting to see how you connect like personal values, company values, economic values with this public value that affects the whole decision-making process. So thank you so much. At the beginning of the session, I didn't mention that we had a fourth speaker, because yesterday he told us maybe he couldn't make it, but he's here. So let me introduce you to Mark. Mark Vandenberg, from the University of Twente, Faculty of Engineering and Technology. Mark, thank you so much for finally making it. I guess we can jump to your presentation.
Yes. So first of all, apologies for being late in this session, and also maybe putting the previous speakers on the spot. I believe I was scheduled first, but my computer ran into problems when opening Zoom. Nowadays, I'm only using Teams, so I think my computer also had to get used to it. Anyway, I had to switch laptops quickly, so that's why I'm late. But I'm here now, and if you're okay with it, then I would like to share my slides and give a short presentation to you.
Yes, sure, no problem. The good news is you're here and you're gonna do the presentation. I made you already like a co-host, so I think you should be able to share a screen now.
Okay, does it work now?
Yeah, it's working.
Can you see my screen? Yeah. All right. So when the family in this house that you see on the screen, when the family that was living in the house on this screen was collecting classical cars. So when the collection was growing, at a certain point, this house no longer met the needs of the family. And what they decided to do is actually move the entire house to the opposite side of the street. It made the national news because this was quite a special case. So they decided to move the house because they liked both the house and the specific site where it was located. So while moving the house, they managed to get they managed to retain the value of the house, so both the social value, the economic value, and also they created a public value because they save resources for both new construction and they saved in waste production. So it made the national news because it was a very particular event, and now often we see very different things happening. There's a lot of waste, as you know, in the construction industry. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and there's also a lot of resource consumption. I will be talking about that, basically trying to give you 3 insights for creating public value in this short presentation. And also linking it with the research that we do at our university. So I work at the University of Twente, and what I do is I make circular urban mining futures. And that means I work on creating actionable insights, actionable knowledge to revisit and change practices. How do you do that? So 3 insights. First one is that when we look at demolition projects, is that typically a demolition project is a point in time where a building needs to be moved. It is no longer needed. The prediction has turned out to be wrong. So the building needs to be gone and move. And what we often see that it is translated into waste, and that may be recyclable or not, but it often is waste. And what we now would like to do is rethinking these current buildings, also future buildings, but I'm more interested in the current building stock, to rethink it is as an urban mine, and then also to revalue waste as resources. Because the point is, in any building, we should see it as a collection of valuable materials, and these different elements have different reuse potentials. So what this very nice and interesting work of Stuart Brand learned us was that also buildings need to change over time. They change over time. Our needs change over time, and such as from the family that I showed you in the very beginning. And that also means at a certain point in time, at any point in time, even though the building as a whole may not be necessary any longer, there are many elements in such a building that are still valuable, that have, we could say, reuse potential. So first insight that I'd like to share in this presentation is that we should take a more systems perspective and look at buildings and the built environment as a collection of elements that have very different, that all have different reuse potentials. So it's taking a systems perspective, looking at the building as a collection of valuable materials is a very important, well, you could say, first insight to create a public value. And the potential to reuse certain elements also can be unlocked, and that relates to the second insight that I'd like to share. So unlocking the potential to reuse elements takes effort. Buildings do not die naturally. It takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of machinery. It takes a lot of planning. It's really a craft to actually be able to reuse certain elements. Well, in a previous study, I proposed that this is a sort of a process that turns the obsolete life into a new life. So we are making the future, trying to rethink what is the future potential of old obsolete building elements. And doing that always consists of a series of activities, starting with identifying, well, which materials have actually reuse potential, then harvesting those materials, and at the end, distributing them. I put them here on the slide as a series of activities that happen after each other, and that is very important because at each of these activities, things may go wrong, and at the end, that may have as an impact that materials or elements are not reused in the end, but are treated as waste. We also saw that during a recent site visits that I conducted together with a PhD student, Li Jiang, that I supervised in a PACER project, sort of a similar project as a Reincarnate project. So we visited this theater somewhere in the Netherlands, and there was a lot of there were a lot of ambitions to reuse many materials. And one of the materials that where they succeeded to reuse was the flooring. So the flooring was a very nice floor, a wooden floor that they could take it out and that will be reused. So basically, they saw the value of this floor, they took it out and they harvested it and they stored it at a certain place. So they are going to distribute it at a certain point in time and apply it again. Well, at any of these three activities, things may go wrong, you could say. So on this picture, we see, for example, that the insulation materials and cardboard and so on were not identified as reusable. So we see them just stacked in different piles here. This is waste. It will be moved away. Well, the concrete floor that was identified as very reusable, it had a lot of potential. It is strong enough, good characteristics, and so on. But it is very big, and in that sense, also impractical to harvest. So we see some loss of value happening during that activity. And then the last example relates to the chairs. Well, these chairs also have a sort of historical value or an emotional value, if you like. And they are ready to harvest. It could be interesting to have your own seat that you from the theater in your city in your house, but actually there was not enough demand to do this. So the second main insight that I'd like to share in this presentation is that there are many future-making practices that are performed by demolition contractors that unlock reuse potentials, but they always involve at least three activities that are identifying which materials are reusable, harvesting them, and distributing these materials. Then I come to the last sort of insight that I like to bring forward here is that digital technologies can support these future-making practices. But digital technologies help in creating and opening up this new future for the reusable materials. We're looking into this. So we're looking in the PACER project, we try to support each of these identifying, harvesting, and distribution activities with new digital technologies. But what we learned before is that whatever we think of, we always need to take care of that can also be embedded within local project routines or activities. So on the slide, you see an example where I created a very nice virtual system that demolition contractors can use to spot reusable materials and to label them. But carrying such a laptop around in a building that is dirty, that is open to the weather, that gets wet, because we're talking about demolition processes. Well, that was very impractical. So a solution that we found is just to put the laptop on this warehouse cart so you can carry it around. What I like to say with this example is whatever digital technologies, you always need to go back to the end user, and try to understand how it helps him or her in the activity. Last example relates to a decision support system that we developed for a demolition contractor. Also here, we found out that the demolition contractor wanted to know something about, what is the economic value, what is the environmental value, and the social value. But and in all of these dimensions, circularity, circular practices can have an impact, but they were not so interested in the social value. In circular construction, we often talk about job creation possibilities, but in the current Dutch labor markets, there's a scarcity of labor. So it's very hard to find people. So they were not so interested in creating more social value. And we also, in developing this decision support tool, we kind of did not put so much emphasis on that because they're not interested in it so much. So the third and last insights that I'm sharing with you today is that digital technologies can support these future making practices, but they only do that when they are carefully aligned with the local project routines and activities. So summarizing this talk, it talks about how can you make circular urban mining futures, rethinking the existing built environment as an urban mine and rethinking waste as resources. Well, that is possible because buildings consist of elements with reuse potential, and you can unlock that reuse potential. Unlocking that reuse potential involves, you could say, future-making practices, which always involves identifying, harvesting, and distributing activities. And finally, digital technologies can support those activities if you align them with the context in which they need to be embedded. So thank you once more for all of your attention for joining this presentation and this very nice session. If you'd like to have a chat with me or for an online coffee, feel free to send me an email, and happy to do so.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your presentation and finally making it. We are running a bit out of time, so Joao, let's jump to you.
Yeah,
no fine. Pressure at all, but yeah, time's running.
Let me share my screen and see if all works as it's supposed to. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So my name is João. I'm Associate Professor of AI and Digitalization at Erasmus University Rotterdam. I don't specialize in circular economy or construction, so I can take the benefit of making my conversation a bit shorter. But I am a social scientist, so I think of these values from the social science perspective. And when you're talking about creating public value, what are these public value? And is there one value or are there multiple? I think the previous talks already hinted at this. But for instance, what makes it that if I go to Hornbach, to a Home Depot, to a store, hardware store, I can get 100 zip ties for 100 times less than I can get that Balenciaga zip tie that is a fashion accessory, right? Is it the material that justifies the difference? Is it the purely economic functional value of it? No, there's a lot more to value than meets the eyes or that can be easily quantifiable. And when we're talking about construction, I'm glad that Brian brought up conflicting values, because indeed, if we look in the Netherlands, for instance, what do we value more right now, or what does the public value more? Is it to use circular processes to have a donor building and then have a new building from that donor building? Or is it just to build houses, apartments as quickly as possible to address the housing crisis and the high costs that people who need a house have to support? And so even though among this group we might lean more towards the second one, if we look to the public, maybe what's valued now is getting more houses and solving this issue quickly. If we ask ChatGPT, which is a word predictor, what is the most likely word, so it's kind of useful for this exercise, we look at what are the key benefits or values from circular economy in the construction industry, right? And resource efficiency, cost savings, job creation, innovation, resilience, risk mitigation, and environmental sustainability. Again, we can have some arguments, but this seems like a plausible answer. But if we ask what do people value in the built environment or in construction projects and buildings, we look at functionality, usability, safety, security, energy efficiency, not always from the perspective of circularity, aesthetic appeal, and then cost effectiveness, right? And so we can have this at two ways. In what ways can we make waste reduction and circular practices more aligned with these public values and with what people value? Can we build houses more quickly by using these circular practices? But we also have the opposite route, which I think is more realistic, considering the challenges that we face nowadays. Which it is, how can we align what the values of the public are with what circular practices are offering? And this is where the social sciences side comes a bit, and with a bit of provocation. And there are four key ways of doing this according to democracy theories. One is to take this liberal individualistic approach from Schumpeter, so things like financial incentives, regulations, and just developing a market where these practices are more economically attractive than the linear practices. If it's cheaper, people will go for it. And this is basically one approach to aligning the values of circular economy with the public value. The second one will be what we call deliberative democracy, which is actually when we weigh in all of the arguments, waste reduction and circularity make sense from an environmental perspective, from a resource efficiency perspective. So we make the rational arguments for this. This relates a bit to what Brian was showing of considering the multiple scenarios and then looking at these as variables and deciding what is the best according to a consensus and having a public discussion about this. This is from Jürgen Habermas, and again, a different perspective on how can we align the public values with the circular economy values. A third perspective is this agonistic, not antagonistic, so it's not full-on conflict, but this agonistic perspective, that the way that we can make people change their mind about pursuing seriously these circular solutions is through passion, through emotion, through radical action, to do something that's deeply innovative, something that's deeply disruptive with the system. And it's a bit the argument, okay, the linear companies, the linear procedures are not playing fair. They're taking resources in a way that's going to compromise our future. So we also don't need to play fair. And we are going to resort to any means necessary to make this point across. But again, it's making this argument from a strong perspective. And the final perspective is this communitarian perspective. How do we shift towards a circular economy and to public values that value this circularity? Well, it's more through relationships, creating networks, connections, to making this community-based. Okay, the way we change things might not be with traditional concepts of value like money, but it's more, I value your relationship with me, and as a community, we move towards more circularity. This also relates to the open source way of processing things like Linux, where everybody contributes, and when everybody contributes, then we shift into a more circular solution. So why am I bringing in these abstract social science democracy theories to a discussion like this? In Reincarnate, we do stakeholder mapping, and then in stakeholder mapping, it's very common that we put also, besides the traditional stakeholders, we put also, this is a bit small, but we put consumers, then we put logistics, manufacturer, real estate developers, waste management, recycling industry, and so forth. What I want to emphasize is that all of us here, universities, companies, in these projects, we are also consumers, and we also have a strong influence and an impact in setting up what is valued by the public. And again, you can pick one of the four routes that I mentioned, or pick only one of them. They can be combined also with multiple ones. But my kind of call to action, or my provocative reasoning here is, if you are working on waste reduction, you need to also take action as a member of the public. And this is the way that we can change these public values and make these values more aligned with circularity. And you can pick different ways of doing it, but be aware of your importance and your role in shaping what is considered public value, so that we also transition into that. And this is a discussion forum, so in a way, to have enough time for discussion, I also end my presentation here, and we have still a bit of time. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Joao. Yeah, we have like 5-6 minutes. If you want to stay a bit longer, it's okay. To answer your questions, to hear about your comments. Niharika, maybe you want to just moderate the discussion. I don't see any question in the chat, but please feel free to just open your mics and jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, I was about to say that considering that I have the leverage of asking the questions, I could have gone first, but considering that you have it, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Pablo, you have quite a bit of a provocative presentation, but indeed, and at the end you also said it doesn't reflect on the individual yet. So, looking also at the other presentations, how do you see what is the path so that it reflects more on the individual, and especially all of this conversation about value, if you come from this more background of risk assessment and securities and how do you see this perspective from an economic but also a social perspective? How does it get to the individual so that we start making decisions considering different things? And how do you convince people that the good investment is indeed on these circular solutions when, for instance, in the financial markets, we now start seeing these anti-woke or anti-green investments as well gaining traction. So I wanted your perspective on that, also considering your background.
Thanks for the question, Joe. And I liked your 4 perspectives, Schumpeter and Habermas. Really like the agonistic part. I think there's not a single solution to it. If we stick to the perspective that the only way forward is the transactional model, where there needs to be a benefit for you. And I don't want to offend anybody, but look at what's happening right now in the American political system. Winner simply takes all. So if we go for a pure play transactional model, we don't care about people that are not the biggest anymore. So I don't want to end up in a situation like that. I think we need to have a dialogue about who has what particular interest. For instance, what's the interest of society, and who is willing to make an agonistic change and say, okay, let's do something different. And it's a combination of things. What I experience in my daily business activities, so I'm not a researcher, but in my business activities, I see that business people make decisions upon how do I make money with something that is good as well. Not everybody is 100% economic person that says, I only do stuff that brings me money. Why do you get children? Well, because they bring you fun as well, because they cost you a lot of money. So from a pure transactional point of view, never start with kids. Why is everybody doing it? Because there's more to it. So I think we should combine that in one way or the other. And I sincerely hope and try to trigger market makers. The government is an important market maker, but also financial markets. They have lots of regulations. Accounting principles are not made by government, they're made by businesses. I think we should explain to decision makers, lawmakers, regulation makers, that we need to include social value in decision mechanics. But currently, if we do have a challenge, as you said, and with making the link to what's happening in America, I think it's clear that we have a challenge at this moment.
That was a good way of putting it. So, with the children example as well, I might steal that for other things. Thanks.
In case nobody has any question, I actually have a question for Mark. I really like the point where you highlighted the emotional value that is associated with certain products. So, could you throw a little more light on how the emotional value on certain things can be leveraged to create more public value, as in to reduce more consumption or to reduce more waste in those lights? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Good question. Also a challenging one. I think we need to rethink. Well, what is the value of our building elements, and especially elements that already have a history or maybe have multiple histories, can be very interesting, and from that sense also valuable to end consumers. So we see it also happening often in projects where they really want to show and communicate that something is circular. So then they really make sure that the elements that are used in, let's say, building projects are not perfect. We can see that they're used, but that also has a certain charm, and it's interesting for people. And what I think is we need to, well, it's a change of mindset. We also need to, what we can do as researchers or business people, we can tell these stories. Tell these stories. What is the previous history of this building material? Of course, it needs to have all kinds of certification and qualification quality criteria and so on. But it's also interesting to know that it was used in a different location, it had a previous life, and by reusing it, we saved on resources, we saved on waste, and that's an interesting story. And maybe also connects to the previous question, like what is the role of the individual in here? What we also see is that you really need to have these sustainability champions that take these actions because they find it individually very interesting or important, or they're motivated. So they do things even though the client does not specifically ask for it. And I mean that is interesting. Then we can really start showing things.
Thank you so much. I think we have a question in the chat. It's from Gloria. Thank you for your presentation, interesting presentations. In the case of reuse of construction products from old buildings, that nowadays need CE marketing to put them into market, has any one of you practical experience on how this topic is being dealt? This kind of things can help to identify the first step that Mark said. So maybe you can talk about more in the sense of how this CE marketing has helped in rebranding of the product.
Yeah, there are short answers. There are different ways to do it. Because we're running out of time, I see different ways to do it. We're also, by Pablo, we are working also with an app with a firm, and also in the basic project we try to support this identification step. So it is a difficult one. But there are also other methods. You can recognize value from drawings, from understanding the history and the previous life of building materials and so on. But yeah, I'm happy to discuss it further, but maybe in a one-to-one or so.
Does anybody have any other question? If not, I can direct a question towards Joao, if that's okay. And if we still have time.
Yeah, I think we're 5 minutes over, so you can do
Yeah.
quick question, quick answer, and then
Yeah.
we.
Yes, my question will be considering the theories that you gave across regarding the democracy theories, which do you think will be the most appropriate considering the scenario in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, different democracies, different places have different things, but I think there's an urgency to implementing these circular principles. Otherwise, we will have very serious consequences not that far away. So agonism and going with the passion, doing something disruptive and radical to change the current status is, I think, the one that will bring us closer to the outcomes that we need. Because rational discussion, market incentives, as Pablo also mentioned, they might not deliver enough, and community efforts might be are useful, but they start typically at a small scale, so it's difficult to make them broader. So maybe I lean towards the agonistic perspective, but as I said, I'm not the expert here, so others are free to disagree.
Okay, so yeah, considering that we passed the time, Brian, sorry, you didn't got any questions for you, but maybe next time. I want to thank everyone for joining in this second discussion forum. Just as a reminder, we will have like the third and last one next month. So yeah, stay tuned for the news coming. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining and being part of the Reincarnate community. Thank you so much for the speakers as well, and hope to see you soon.